Hi, Sarah.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Awesome. Well, I'm so excited to have this opportunity to spend time with you today. And if it's okay, we're going to dive right in.
Let's do it.
Um, yeah. So, unlike me, I've spent my entire career on the investing side. You have had your hands in so many different roles. Can you just share with us a little about the journey that you've had?
Yeah. So, I started in marketing at sort of big corporates like Chanel, Red Bull, and then made the leap to startups and did biz dev and product at startups. And then a startup I was at was running out of money, and I was talking to VC friends about what to do and what to do next. And then one of them just started kind of asking my feedback, asking for help and questions about, hey, what do you think about this company? What do you think about this space? And instead of sort of, sending her like a one-line answer, I would really, wanted to be respectful of her time and the fact that she kind of had faith in me. And so I would spend a long time just kind of, doing some research and writing these long answers. And then after a few of those, she was like, hey, I think you might be good at investing. Do you want to come work at my fund? And I said, sure. And so, from there was in the investing world, and then, left to be a startup founder, and then came back, to launch Cleo. And so, along the way was advisor at Bumble, helped them launch a fund. But I'm a huge fan. We love our lifelong investors, but I'm a huge fan of the operator investor model, especially at the earliest stages, because it gives me a lot of insight into kind of what founders are going through.
That's fantastic. So do you feel like you had a plan in place, or were you really more navigating this journey opportunistically and following your intellectual curiosity?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as Mike Tyson likes to say, everybody has a plan till they get punched in the mouth, right? So, I don't know. I mean, I wanted to do interesting things. I wanted to learn things, and that was my plan, and I've achieved it. I think that the over optimization. I talk to a lot of student groups, and they're always like these little box checker, like brilliant kids who are like, what do I do to like minimize risk and blah, blah. I'm like, that sounds like you're not having a life. So I don't have any advice for you. I like to have a life. So, do the things that are interesting and exciting, and generally, move in the direction of big goals you have. And I think that's a pretty decent plan for most people.
So let's focus for a bit about, the roles you've had as a founder, myths versus facts. Are there some common misconceptions about being a founder?
I think being a founder is a terrible, horrible job, and you probably shouldn't do it. If you are good at working in corporates, if you are good at being somewhere where other people will give you a decent sized paycheck, then like you should probably just keep doing that, because it seems like a much sort of more logical way to spend your life. You can have weekends, you can have nights, you can go to birthdays. And so, I think the idea that being a founder is glamorous and interesting and fun, it's very interesting. It is not glamorous. It is almost never fun, and almost never fun in the way that, like, if you live in New York or Boston or a big marathon city, right? You go out a marathon day and you see everybody and they ran the marathon and everybody cheers for them. And so you're like, oh, I should do that. Running a marathon's not fun. Right? Like there's reasons to do it, but it's not fun. And seeing the end result for 30 seconds, you're like, oh, I should do that. I want people to cheer for me when I come into brunch. No, you don't want to run a marathon, right? Like it's terrible. And starting a company is similar. That being said, and I'm not a marathon runner, there are tons of people who do it and they enjoy it, not because it's easy or fun, but because they're getting some fulfillment out of it. And I think that a lot of startup founding is the same thing. If you have a good job that you like, and you like your coworkers, and you like your life, and you're building, you're solving problems that are broadly the problems you want to solve in the world, then like do that, right? If you're either kind of broadly unmanageable, right? And corporate is really, really hard, much harder to work at corporate than it is to start a company. And that's not because it's easy to start companies. It's because I'm terrible in corporate environments. So for me, being in corporate is actually hard, really hard. And I also always have new ideas, and I'm a little bit of a workaholic, or a lot of a bit of a workaholic. I'm also an insomniac, which is terrible in every other place, but it's kind of great if you're a founder because like you don't really have time to sleep anyway. So if you don't need sleep, or if your body doesn't sleep, then you sort of have a leg up. And none of this is like to scare you away from being a founder if you're a founder. It's just that if none of this resonates with you, then like, for the love of God, just go get a better job at Google. You'll be so happy, and they have the best salad bars in the world.
I totally agree. So do you think then that there are certain qualities that great founders share, or perhaps even as an investor, that now with pattern recognition, you tend to zero in and looking for certain traits or personalities?
Yeah, I mean, look, great subjective, right? There are founders who are, pretty openly like sociopaths, or they're not good people or whatever, but they've built huge companies and they're incredibly wealthy from it, right? And we won't name names because you could probably guess some of them. Are those great founders? I don't know, right? And for me, those are not the kinds of founders that I would be excited to back. So I can only talk about what I'm excited to back. Every lid has a pot, but for me, I'm generally looking for founders who have great founder market fit, meaning that there's a really obvious reason that they are the ones building the company they're building. And, the difference between that and what I call like MBAs in search of a problem, or PMs in search of a problem, is, I'll never forget once, like a decade ago, this guy comes to me and he's pitching me, he has a stroller company, and I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Like, why? And he's like, oh, because, my like cousin had a baby and I found out how much bugaboos were. So I decided I should build a direct to consumer stroller company. 23-year-old guy, no kids. He'd like never even nannied before, right? He just like saw something and said, I'll go build that. To the best of my knowledge, that company is not around anymore. It never went anywhere. Why? Because building a startup is really, really hard. And when you build a startup for no real reason other than like, it is one thing to text your friend and say, LOL, we should start a stroller company. Did you see how much that stroller was that we had to buy for a baby shower? It should probably end there, unless you're also like obsessed with the problem for some reason, right? Because the worst case scenario isn't that your company fails. The worst case scenario is your company succeeds, and then you have to spend the next 20 years of your life building fucking strollers, and you don't even like kids, right? So that's not good. And so I want to see founder market fit. It might be something you research for years. It might be lived experiences. It might be something that you are obsessed with, and you've interviewed, 500 parents about their strollers, and you've become obsessed for whatever reason. There, you can, it's not that you have to have like this personal story. And candidly, generally, personal stories are a dime a dozen, right? If I have $1 for every woman who's like, I have a skincare company because I had bad skin, or I started this company because I had this, like, yes, right? That to me is table stakes. It's not sort of why I would invest, but it is table stakes, right? And then beyond that, I like huge markets. It's really hard to build companies. And if you are not building in a market that can easily support multiple billion-dollar companies, the odds that everything will go well and you will end up building a billion-dollar company, and venture investors are looking for billion-dollar exits because that's our job. And if you're like, well, but there's a lot of other great kinds of companies to build that aren't billion-dollar companies, that's awesome. But like, that's not my business, so I have no insight into it, right? I can just tell you about my business. My business is to invest in things that can become multi-billion-dollar exits. So it is much easier to build a multi-billion-dollar company in a space that could have a trillion-dollar company, because that means you could mess up by orders of magnitude and still build a billion-dollar company. If you're building a company in a space that could barely, the entire market's $1 billion, do you know how well you have to execute to be able to be that billion-dollar company? You can never mess up anything. And like, not to trigger your childhood trauma, but you are not perfect. You will mess up a lot all the time. It's a lot easier if you're in a space where you can mess up a ton, right? Think of it like the difference between water painting and like brain surgery, right? You want to be able to water paint where you're like, I'll just like blend it. It looks great. It's art, versus like, oh, I'm sorry. Did you need that half of your brain? Right? So like, do yourself a favor and build companies in huge markets that you personally are really, really interested in and excited about. And then for me, the other obvious things are like, have really high integrity. There's 1,000 chances to sell your soul. And sometimes the ROI is relatively high. I'm interested in people who don't want that bet. And the other thing I would say is be super, super coachable, because you don't know everything. Even if you're the smartest person in the world, you don't know everything about a new company you're building, because it is new, and things change quickly. And so if you're not coachable, not be coachable because I want you to be coachable. If you're not coachable and I invest in you, I'll just go spend time with my other founders who are. And as I like to say, money doesn't care how it's made. So I'll make my money on them and not you. But for you personally, if you are doing this, it is not easy or fun. And so if you're not willing to take every piece of help you can get, I heard Laura on the last channel or the last panel talking about, when people come in and say, or asking her for things, like ask people for things, but be willing to take their feedback and be coachable, because otherwise it only hurts you. And to be very explicit, it only hurts the amount of money you'll eventually make off this company. And if you want to be poor, it is probably so much more pleasant to be poor while not building a company than to be poor while working 20-hour days as a founder.
That's so well said. And so I wonder now, with hindsight being 2020, not that you've had time along the way to reflect much, but in the spirit of coachability, have you had an experience as you look back as a founder and you wish you had done it differently or approached it in a slightly different way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's always individual regrets, but at the same time, like Very Sliding Doors, the seminal Gwyneth Paltrow movie from the 90s, if you or Butterfly Effect, or whatever weird movie from the 90s and early 2000s that deals with the concept of time and missed opportunities, right? The reality is that if you do anything different, then everything's different. And so I have a rule that if I want to change one thing, I want to change everything, right? So like right now I'm looking at myself and I'm like, oh, I actually have too much blush on for this lipstick, right? But if I'm going to stop and think about that, then it's like, well, why stop there? I could have had an entire blowout, right? I could have gotten Beyonce's Glam Squad. Like I could have an entirely new face, right? If we're going to regret one thing, then it's pointless, because you can't go back in time and fix it. If you're an interesting way and regret everything you've ever done, right? Like, why was I born in this time to this family? I found out the other day that the Prince of Liechtenstein is married to a Black American woman. And I was like, okay, so the Prince of Liechtenstein, Prince Harry, the Princess of Norway, how many royals, right, are down with the squirrel that I missed out on? So if I'm going to regret something, it's not going to be that one time 5 years ago when I was starting my company, I didn't buy the .com, I bought the .co. It's going to be that I'm not I guess Queen Elizabeth, why stop there? All of that is to say there are tons of things to regret, but it's a really weird use of time.
Yep. I agree with you. I mean, I think we can always do better. And I think that most of us do try going forward. If you stumble along the way, you're going to put more effort into it or seek more coaching and guidance and input and feedback as you move forward. But there's not a lot of time for regret. I am curious though, have you ever thought about quitting, throwing in the towel? Have you ever been in a position where you thought either this isn't working and I need to just, admit that, or this isn't working, for other reasons, and I can spend my time doing something more productive?
I mean, look, if one of these princes shows up and they have a big enough tiara, then I might consider a different job, right? But I think in general, when you do something else, it should always feel like forward momentum, right? And forward momentum isn't it's like in working out, right? If you're I want to, I'll go back to marathon running. I don't know anything about it, but I like talking about it today. I'm going to train for a marathon, right? It's not that you go out and you run 1 mile, then 2 miles, then 3 miles, and 4 miles, all the way up to 32 miles, right? It's that you run 1 mile and then 2 miles and then 3 miles, and then you have a rest day, right? But you don't say to yourself, oh, I'm a failure at marathon running because I had a rest day today. You say, well, I had a rest day today because that's actually how I make the most impact on moving towards my goal, right? And so until you're dead, you're not done. And so the idea that doing something different or saying, I'm at the end of this particular journey, right? It's like when you finish eating, you don't sit at a restaurant and say, well, keep bringing me more food. I can't finish. I'd be a failure. You say, that was a really great meal. I had the whole meal. That was the point of the meal. And then now I'm going to go home, not because I'm declaring failure, right? But because that's the natural end point. And then now let's think about, let's enjoy it and take it for what it was. And then think about what's next. And so I don't and it's not that I'm afraid of failure. I fail all the time at everything, everybody does. But I think in general, in this startup journey in particular, it's less about failure, right? And it's more about, like, have you ever been water skiing? I hate water skiing because, not because of anything about water skiing, but because about my inability to let go, which is like a very on the nose metaphor. So when you're water skiing, you hold on and then the boat starts going, and then you either get up and you're water skiing or it doesn't, and then you fall forward into the water. And as soon as you start to fall, you let go of the tow rope.
Mm-hmm.
You don't, you're face down in the water getting dragged behind a boat, right? I have like this weird thing in my brain when I water ski where it takes me like 5 seconds too long. And 5 seconds is not a long time unless you're being dragged face down in the water behind a speedboat, right? So like, is it failure that I am choosing not to be dragged? And there's no way to get back up, right? If you've ever been water skiing, just there's no force on earth that would allow you to somehow like go from being face down in the water to getting back standing. You have to stop and start again, right? So like, to me, is that failure, right? Should I just hold on forever with my face down in the water? Or do I stop so that I can reset and start again and take what I learned to like move forward? In other news, I don't water ski that often because I'm pretty sure I would drown.
I'm kind of feeling panicky just thinking about that whole scenario.
It's a very like, yes, it is a very literal lesson to learn about yourself. If you have a hard time letting go in life, don't try water skiing.
So let's take this in a different direction. When did you realize how important it is to support other women? Is this something that you've always felt a need to do, or is this something that perhaps you came to a little bit later in your career?
I love that you're basically asking me like, Sarah, when did you stop being an asshole, right? Because like, if you're not supporting other people, you're an asshole. You don't have to support people who are toxic or mean or whatever, but if your general disposition towards life is that you shouldn't support other people, one, you're an asshole. Two, like, that's not how life works, right? Because we all of us are now, call it broadly, human adults, right? And it's almost impossible to become a human adult unless someone was willing to support you literally in their body, and then as you grew up, and then through college, and then through all the things, right? So now you come along and you decide that you don't want to support anybody else. Like, you're like literally breaking the circle of life. And if everybody behaved like you, then the world would like fall apart. So, you know, to me, I don't think of it as like, I want to support other women. I think like, I want to help my friends. I want to help the world. I want to help candidly, I'm selfish. I want to help make the world better for people who look like me and like you, Lori. And so like how to do that if I'm not doing that. And so, you know, the idea and I understand that some people feel this way, but I just can't wrap my head around it, right? In like a rule of science kind of way, the idea that there's a world where you can choose not to support other people and think that life will work out well for you. I would love to see a counterexample where that's true, because we all exist as systems. None of us are just one being, right? Like, Elon Musk needs his Twitter followers more than his Twitter followers need him, even though most of his Twitter followers would aggressively disagree with that, right? But he knows that. And that's why he's constantly putting out content. And I use Elon as an example of a person that is probably very low on most of our list to think about as like, now that's a guy who really loves to support other people. But the reality is that like no one lives in a vacuum, right? If you want to be the world's richest person, you need people to support you to buy stuff from you. Or if you want to be the world's biggest warlord, you need armies to follow you, right? There is no not supporting other people. And not that I want to be a warlord specifically, I'll settle for being a princess, a queen. But the reality is that like you can't, even a queen, like what's a queen without subjects, right? So like you can't do anything in a vacuum. And anybody who thinks that you can has clearly never spent time trying to breathe in a vacuum. Which also don't do that. Don't water ski, don't breathe in a vacuum, don't run marathons. Like we're just giving you like a lot of life tips today.
Okay, well, this is my personal favorite question. Can you tell us about, who are your mentors or some advice that you've received from your mentors? What are some of the biggest takeaways that you've learned from them?
Yeah, so I think it's so fascinating because I'm an elder millennial. This like obsession with mentor culture where it's like, I need to go find somebody and email them and ask them to be my mentor. And then we're going to meet twice a year and then they're going to be my mentor. Like, I don't have time for that. not like I like informally or sometimes formally mentor people that I already happen to know, but not very many of them. And like the idea that this like ideal dream person that you really want to like learn from has time and bandwidth to help you is just not true. And that doesn't mean they're not generous with their time. It's just like people are busy, people have lives, people are busy. And you're not any more worthy or unworthy of mentorship than the other 7, right? So like, how does one choose? And I'm really obsessed with the idea of sort of ambient mentorship, which means that a lot of the people, and by the way, a lot of the world's best mentors are like dead or, otherwise inaccessible to you, right? Like Martin Luther King Jr., great mentor, probably a really generous guy who would actually be happy to mentor a lot of people. He's literally dead. What do you do, right? Do you say, I'm never going to read about him. I'm never going to learn from his lessons. I'm never going to read his speeches. I'm never going to live his values. No, you just go figure it out in this asynchronous fashion. And there's no reason I'm not dead, which is great, but there's no reason that you can't do that with me or with Lori or with anybody, right? So like I have learned so much from people that I've never met, or even people that I know, I learn from them before I meet them, meaning or otherwise, right? So I have people who are kind of mentors and who I am friends with, but when I'm hanging out with them, we're hanging out because we're friends. And a lot of the insights and the inspiration I'm getting from them is from, not this, right? You can call my friends and say, oh my God, is Sarah so inspiring? And they'll be like, Sarah really likes wine and Taco Bell. I'm not sure what you mean by inspiring, right? But then like, if you read them a quote of mine, they'd be like, wow, that's so inspiring. Like the reality is that everyone and everything can be a mentor to you, even really bad experiences, right? Call them anti-mentors. If I had a terrible boss, we've all had terrible bosses, and we've all done this with our parents where you're like, I will never do this, right? Great, that's an anti-mentor moment. Now remember it, right? So I've learned I'm only, as every human is, I'm only a sum of the experiences and thoughts and things I've read and listened to and experienced that have shaped me. But I haven't done it in the way of, oh, I can't be influenced or mentored by Lori until we have a bi-weekly or bi-monthly phone call. I can do that by having known her for years and just following her work and seeing what she's been able to do and adapting it for myself. Because the other thing that happens to me a lot is people will ask me like, what should I do? And they're not asking me like, hey, are these deal terms right? They're asking me for these like big unknowables. Like, should I go get an MBA or should I stay at this job? And I'm like, sweetie, I can give you an answer, but I don't live your life and you don't really know me and I don't really know you. So the idea that you're going to live the rest of your life on a trajectory that a complete stranger told you is like super crazy. You might as well just flip a coin, but 2, like go live your own life, right? And so like take in a bunch of different amazing, inspiring content and ideas from everywhere. Like my favorite business book is a book called Attached that's about romantic relationships, but it's super helpful for business too. So take in your content from everywhere, from anyone you can find it, from anything that inspires you or deeply doesn't inspire you, and then use it to like live your own life, not the life that a mentor like writes down on a napkin for you.
I feel like this is just the tip of the iceberg. We have so much more, to cover, and I need to go Google the Prince of Liechtenstein right now.
That's pretty cute.
Go deep for a little while on that, but thank you so much. I know on behalf of everyone listening that you've inspired us, you've motivated us, you've made us laugh today, which we all appreciate. So thanks, Sarah, for sharing your journey with us and your reflections.
Yeah, thank you guys. And then if you are startup founders and you're not following my advice and you're starting a company anyway, great, we love it. Anybody can pitch us at cleocap.com. I'll drop it in the chat. And yeah, thank you guys so much. And so excited to be a part of Startup Grind. So thanks, guys.